So the crypto market is in a very weird place right now, and I want to talk about my personal thoughts on the market, what I think is going to happen, and how we're going to come out of this, and what type of strategy you can implement in the meantime to make sure that you are mitigating your risk within decentralized finance, but also to make sure that you're accumulating more assets in your portfolio to build that bag over time. Let's talk about the market for a couple minutes, and then we're going to dive into the strategy. First things first, if you analyze where we're currently at in the Bitcoin halving process on other markets, you can see that we're right in that area where Bitcoin completely crashes before the big run. And the big run here at this time isn't going to be significantly larger than what we just saw. And what I mean is we recently peaked at $108,000 just a couple months back. Well, we're most likely going to be going to $125,000, maybe $135,000 if we just slightly surpass that all-time high that we recently set. Thing is, Bitcoin especially, but also crypto as a whole, is fundamentally at the best place it's ever been at. We have the government invest into Bitcoin. That is a huge thing in the United States itself. On top of that, we have institutional level adoption. We have ETFs. We have big companies invest into Bitcoin. Point is, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is at the best spot that it's ever been when it comes down to fundamentals. Price-wise though, and where we're currently in the market, it's not. And in a way, it's almost going in the opposite direction, a lot of people feel like, and there's a lot of fear in the market. And a lot of people wonder, hey, should I be buying Ethereum at these prices at 1880 per Ethereum token? Or is Ethereum really dead, right? But then they also look at Solana and they say, should I be buying Solana at $125? Or was it just pumped up because of a bunch of hype of meme coins and there isn't really much utility there and it's hyperinflationary? So a lot of investors are torn on what they should do with their capital, if they should sell their positions. And that's exactly what this strategy that I'm going to be revealing today is tailored to. Now, on top of that, I want to talk about what's going on in the overall markets. The president of the United States, Donald Trump, is manipulating these markets. And I can confidently say that because if you look at the NASDAQ, it is down 9.5% this year alone. That's not in the past year. That's basically over the past 90 days. It's down 9.5%. And the reason why these markets are being manipulated is simply because interest rates in the United States are so high, and the Federal Reserve is not taking measures to knock down those interest rates. So President Trump's economic plan is to manipulate these markets in the meantime and essentially knock down the interest rates by doing so. Obviously, there's a whole plan behind how that actually works, which I'm not going to dive into, nor am I even fully familiar with, simply because I am not an economics major. But the point is, that's the end goal. Knock the markets in the short term, and when we're talking short term, we're talking 3 to 6 months, and ultimately that will kind of force the hand of the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates so Americans can be able to afford things, and Americans can get back to a point where they were 10, 20 years ago, basically. So that also affects cryptocurrency. In the meantime, cryptocurrency is completely correlated to these other markets. But I think in the future, cryptocurrency does branch off from the stock market and kind of deviates from where the returns actually come from, simply because fundamentally we are at the best point ever, fundamentally, in crypto, basically. So my strategy, we're going to assume that we have about $100,000 right here. And since there is uncertainty in the market, what we would do is we would allocate a portion to delta neutral strategies. Delta neutral strategies could include running, a long liquidity pool and then shorting out your exposure, basically. And those are going to do higher returns than something like just standard stablecoin strategies, which is also a delta neutral strategy. Point is, I'm going to be wanting to allocate about 20% of the overall portfolio to these delta neutral strategies because that's going to allow me to essentially minimize some of my market exposure, but also allow me to consistently have cash flow. Now, another thing, our HODLs. Our HODLs are going to be a big portion of this. I am personally going to want to allocate 25% over to HODLs, and HODLs and lending are very similar. Lending is just earning a little bit of money on your HODLs, and then there would be another 10% in lending and about 45% over here in liquidity pools. So lending out what we can, otherwise we're just HODLing basically. We have some delta neutral strategies, and of course we have majority of our capital in liquidity pools. Now, here's the problem with this, first of all. Most investors, maybe even including yourself, will dive into liquidity pools with 45% or even more of their portfolio. And what ends up happening is they end up getting burned by divergence and impermanent losses, basically. So much to the point where they would have been better to stick their money in these HODLs or these delta neutral strategies or lending and borrowing, right? So you can only invest into these liquidity pools if you are very, very confident in your strategy. And if you guys aren't entirely confident in your strategy, or maybe you even want to implement a strategy like I'm about to show you today, there is going to be a link right below this video to kind of dive into it with my team on a phone call. You just have to fill out a short application, make sure that you're a good fit to hop on the phone with our team, make sure that you actually have a portfolio. And then from there, on the phone with our team, we'll give you some suggestions and see if maybe there's a way that we can help you out in another manner. We're going to go ahead and go to the next phase. So when it comes down to our subcategories, which is going to be like crypto versus crypto to stable, right? Where do we want to park our capital? So specifically in liquidity pools, right? If we have a 45% allocation, this 100% over here is assuming 100% of the 45%, not 100% overall. But personally, I would want to be primarily weighting towards these crypto to crypto liquidity pools. And I mean like 75% over there and about 25% over on the crypto stable. If you structure your crypto to stable liquidity pools right, you can produce high income and high cash flow while at the same time still having some market exposure, but your market exposure is minimized to an extent where you're not going to see as high price gains, but you're also not going to see as high price losses because you have the stablecoin aspect in there. But again, a lot of people end up getting burned by divergence and impermanent losses. So again, that would leave 75% into the crypto, which is primarily where we are going to want to be allocating. Once we dive into the lending and borrowing, we're just going to assume $0 in these stable coins and just 100% of it is in the crypto assets. We have our delta neutral strategies in which I would actually be doing about 80% over here in these hedge positions and about 20% over in the stable positions. So that's going to look something like this. And the reason why we keep 20% in stable and 80% in hedge positions is because with these hedging strategies that we're currently running, they're working very well. We're doing 50% per year on them at the bare minimum, depending on the type of risk and the type of management that you have available at your disposal. But point is 50% per year without market exposure is amazing. Whereas these stable to stable positions, we're getting maybe 15% at max per year on them. And reality is we're just using those stable positions as idle cash, right? When we see nice dips in the market and we are ready to inject more capital, we can easily grab from the stable positions. It's already injected. We don't have to do any waiting for KYC on exchanges or of course for money to hit the exchange bank account because you have delay or whatever it is, right? You already have in stables earning some money, more than what you would earn in a savings account, significantly more, like 3 times the amount, but at the same time, it's not earning its full potential. It's waiting to be deployed. And then over here in the hodls, again, we're going to do 0% on the stables and 100% on the crypto. That's going to look something like this. We have our total deployment, which breaks down 45% into liquidity pools. Of that, 33.8% of the overall portfolio is in crypto to crypto pools. 11.3% of the overall portfolio is in crypto to stable. We have our lending and borrowing, which makes up for 10% of the portfolio, in which that's just 10% lending of the crypto. We have our delta neutral strategies, which is 20% of the overall portfolio. 4% of the overall portfolio goes to the stable, so about $4,000 in reserves on just stable positions ready to be deployed. 16% is going to hedged positions, basically, where we're running long short strategies. And then of course we have 25% in hodls, which all of that is just in cryptocurrency hodls. That would be kind of my blueprint right there. But I want to take it a step further and show you guys a couple examples and what potential allocations could look like when we start to dive into this. So some stuff that I know off the top of my head, and I know this because we're doing a lot of research into different liquidity pools on a daily basis. We have a whole team behind it, basically. We put out a weekly watch list. There's an Ethereum to CBBTC pool over on Aerodrome doing a 30% APR. Now, here's the thing. Once you start to tighten up on that range, depending on your management, you can easily get more than that. That would definitely be something that I want to include in this portfolio. Why? Simply because right now, Bitcoin is still the market leader. And of course, we're hoping that Ethereum will do very, very well and start to pick up the steam and be one of the first altcoins that starts to move. With that being said, I would do an allocation of about probably $17,500 when we look at the overall portfolio, just to create a backbone and create something that consistently brings in income. Now, again, the range that I would be using would be tighter than this range that's displayed over here. We put out broad ranges on these posts, so that way people have a general idea on how to get started. And they could get started with broad ranges and then, of course, later on start to be a little bit more active and whatnot. But had I be diving into this pool myself, I'm going in and I'm probably going to be getting about a 50% APR. So we're going to go ahead and add that strategy right into here. And you could see that allocation, 17.5% of the overall portfolio is added there. Now we also have another 16.25K or so, in which we can create another crypto to crypto liquidity pool. Again, I'm not going to be creating like another 2 to 3 liquidity pools here because I don't want to be overly diversified. I don't think it's worth it, basically. There's also stuff like Ethereum to Edge, Ethereum to Ondo, Ethereum to Tau. There's Ethereum to ENA. I would personally be looking at this Ethereum ENA pool. I think we took a look at this on the channel a couple days ago. So if you guys are new here, make sure to drop a like and subscribe, notifications turned on. Try to put out the best DeFi content for you guys, inform you about different opportunities. But when I looked at that one, it was doing about, I want to say 120% APR. So we're going to assume that we can do about 85% on it, just to assume, hey, we got a broad range, but not as broad as this, because a range of 21 to 88, That's pretty broad. But we do the remainder of the capital, $16,250. Our APR over here, say 85%. We jot that down, and then we also have a crypto to stable liquidity pool to include over here. Again, if we structure this right, we can produce consistent cash flow off of it. I personally wouldn't want to dive into multiple crypto to stable pools. I would just want to have one that I have a lot of conviction in, if that makes sense. And some of those include like Ethereum to USDC, CB, BTC to USDC. Hey, if you wanted to, you go with Sol to USDC. I'd primarily be looking at this Ethereum to USDC pool over here with a range of 1,800 to 2,300. It's about a 70% APR. So we do Ethereum to USDC at a 70% APR, and we can jot that down in here as well. Now, guys, if you wonder what this tool right here is, where we can create this Sankey diagram and where we can kind of crunch together things, and when I'm about to show you our deployment tracker, this is one of the things that we include as part of our DeFi formula roadmap. So going through a DeFi formula roadmap, you're not just going through a bunch of crappy spreadsheets. You're not just going through 10, 20, 30 different tools. You're using Metrics Finance, you're using maybe DeFi Llama, and you're also using our tool right here to kind of progress through our roadmap in a strategic manner. When it comes to lending and borrowing, I am going to just assume that we're going to put blue chips over here. Again, we can dive into Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. We can dive into all those allocations there, but ultimately it's not going to affect the overall yield that we get, because we're going to, on average, get about 2% in APR for just lending out, those types of assets over on Aave or over on Morpho or on Compound or something like that. So we're just going to assume that we're deploying into blue chips. Again, the main ones that I would be including here: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. You can even include some Link, some Render, just those types of assets. Hey, Aave token is also a great one. So yeah, and then we would also have our delta neutral strategies. As far as stablecoin positions go, we also have those on this list right over here. I'm personally in one over on Fluid Dex, earning Paul incentives. This is doing about 9%. We have this Frax USD to USDC doing about 13%. So let's just say we did USDT on Fluid and we just did $4,000 there, earning 9% APR. Again, like at this point, it's not really worth it, including a bunch of, stable strategies, or even two of them, simply because, well, guess what? You have a 4% allocation in your overall portfolio. So when you split that in half, that's $2,000 per each position, which is just not worth it at the end of the day. You're already so little diversified into it. And this is just capital sitting on the sideline. So having it strictly in USDT on like a basically lending platform, you just put it in, pull it out, put it in, pull it out. It's super easy and it keeps it simple, because our purpose is to have sideline capital. On the delta neutral strategies, hedge positions, I currently have a Sol to Fartcoin position, which is doing 100% APR, but I am going to be realistic and say about 60% APR. And when I say 100% APR, guys, I don't just mean on the LP. The LP is doing well over 200%. When you factor in the hedging costs, the short, as well as the overall amount of capital that I had to put up, because only a portion of that was on the liquidity pool and then another portion was on perpetual futures and stuff like that, it cumulatively right now is doing 100% APR. But we're going to assume 60%, assuming that you can't get those same results, because it is going to be hard to manage, and I do put it in a decent amount of management time. And if there's a ton of divergence in the market, guess what? That could easily eat into my earnings, and now I'm only at a 60% APR. But we would assume $16,000 right over here. Again, we're not going to want to go heavily into diversification on these types of positions, because they will take a lot of management. That's one of the things that we do at Builder Wealth. We do not approach it in a way where we need a million different positions, right? If you want to have a lot of different positions, have them in your hodls, but don't have them all in your liquidity pools. Have 2 or 3 very, very, very solid positions in your liquidity pools, and then have a bunch of hodls and use those liquidity pools to build the hodls, but don't have 20 decent, liquidity pools, because then at the end of the day, none of them are very, 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 very good, and none of them are going to go crazy. You're just going to have a bunch of crap in all honesty. And then hodls crypto, we can just call this like altcoins, because that's primarily what we're going to be allocating to. We're going to be allocating stuff that we normally wouldn't be able to put on lending and borrowing platforms. And maybe with like some staking and stuff like that, I know some can earn like 10%, others can earn none. Maybe we earn 1% APR. So we're just going to jot that down. But yeah, that's kind of what our portfolio would look like. I can zoom out for you guys right here so you guys can see it. Our total deployment is split amongst all these things. We actually end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positions. Realistically, we're going to end up with more than that when we talk about how many altcoins we actually have, how many blue chips we actually have. But when we're specifically discussing like liquidity pools and stuff that's like actually yield bearing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's obviously Linden, which doesn't really count. And one of the things I always like to do is stress test, but we're not going to get into that in today's video. If you guys do want me to make a dedicated video on stress testing positions, feel free to let me know. But like my point being is you need to be able to understand how specific positions can perform on a positive note and on a negative note before you even dive into them. That way you have an idea on what's going to happen when volatility starts to pick up. Now, as far as deployment goes, this is our deployment dashboard, and essentially as we kind of deploy these things, we can check them off and you can just see that our overall capital has been deployed. Point is, on this dashboard, you'll see this expected APR of 41% roughly. That's saying, hey, we got 100 grand in capital being, invested basically. And some of these are doing 50, 85, 70%, 60%. Others are doing, 9%, 2%, 1%, right? So when you cumulatively put it all together and do a weighted average, we're coming out to a 40.85% expected APR. Not bad on an overall portfolio level. This is actually a pretty solid portfolio. Again, like when the market's going crazy, this number from 40% will probably be about 60%. When we're talking about 120% APRs or 80% APRs, we're talking on actual liquidity positions. But right now, it's not strategic to deploy all your capital into liquidity positions. It's just not. It's not a good idea because there's so much volatility in the market. Anyways, that right there is my strategy for April 2025. That's how I'd be structuring portfolios nowadays. It's personally how I'm structuring my own portfolio nowadays. I have hedge positions in there. I'm injecting new capital into hedge positions, and I'm using the capital for my hedge positions to build up bags and other liquidity pools. And I'm also using my other liquidity pools to build up bags and hodls and more liquidity pools, basically. So I'm at a point where I'm market neutral on one side of my portfolio, and that's primarily funding all of my capital injections. I'm not really bringing in anything from my bank. If I am bringing in from my bank, it is going into market neutral strategies just because there is a lot of fear in the market. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video, drop a like, subscribe, notifications turned on. And of course, if you do need any support with your DeFi portfolio, you want us to dive into it, we'd be happy to do so. So there's a link right below this video to check out and learn more about our strategy.